You've been arrested on suspicion this morning of the murder of Becky Phillips. For the murder of Liam James Taylor. For the murder of Timothy William Hardwick.
For the murder of Claire Louise Peck. For the attempt murder of Bradley John Gibson.
Of Paul Crampton. Of Kaylee Joanne Desmond. Of Yip Hung Chow.
For the attempt murder of Katie Sue Phillips.
Of Christopher Peasford.
Of Christopher John King at Grantham.
Of Michael Davidson. Of the attempt murder of Patrick Robert Elton. Why did you attempt to murder or murder some of these children?
Staff at the hospital became concerned earlier this year about the number of youngsters suffering cardiac and respiratory arrests.
Something untoward was happening at Grantham Hospital. 13 children had collapsed 24 times in a 59-day period. 4 had died.
There was things happening in that ward that normally wouldn't have happened. It was horrendous.
They will have to decide whether this was a series of incredible medical coincidences or murder.
It was like having a die all over again.
I'm starting to want answers very quickly.
One name kept cropping up time after time after time. Beverley Allitt.
She's the only person that's been there, but we've got to prove it.
There is no direct evidence, there's no witness. She wouldn't answer the questions.
Do you know anything about the cause of this attack?
No reply.
You go into hospital with the expectation that they will help you, not that they will harm you.
We'll never forget what happened.
We just got hate, I'm sorry.
To kill children, who would do that?
A nurse is the last person you'd expect to turn out to be a serial killer.
We knew that there was a hand somewhere that was harming children at Grantham Hospital.
They were unexplained attacks. You would get a child that was admitted to hospital, seemed to be recovering, and then suddenly, for no reason, they would collapse.
There had been 4 deaths in a short period of time on children, which didn't happen normally. In medical terms, they couldn't explain what was happening. We needed to find out who was on the ward for what particular time. You can't just automatically think this is a serial killer. You've got to connect that evidence together to produce a system to show that somebody's responsible for this.
We still had no witnesses, but there was circumstantial evidence that one name kept cropping up time after time after time.
One name that came up over and over again was Beverley Allitt. The 22-year-old nurse who had recently qualified as a state-enrolled nurse. It was her first job within the hospital.
Beverley Allitt was the only nurse present for all the attacks, each and every one of them.
And so I decided that we would arrest Beverley Allitt. I felt that if we arrested her on the Crampton case, where we knew that there was a malicious attack, we could then begin to talk to her about other events within the hospital.
On the day of the arrest, I accompanied her back to Grantham Police Station whilst other officers searched her home address.
When it comes to a murder inquiry, we're looking at opportunity, location and motive. We have no motive at this time at all. This was our big difficulty. There was an anticipation that we were going to find some solid evidence when we arrested Allitt. There was always pressure, and you always wanted to get a result.
She's 22, she's got no previous convictions, she's got a professional job. Who knows, she might admit it. What we wanted from the interview was a confession.
The date is Tuesday, the 21st of May, 1991, and we are in an interview room at Grantham Police Station.
Could you give me your full name, please?
Beverley Allitt.
Your date of birth, please.
4th of the 10th, 1968.
I interviewed her for 17 hours. It was a long day, both for her and for us.
I'll start off the interview with you, Beverley. Have you been aware of the investigations that's been going on?
It makes it hard to accept that a baby comes in and they die. It does for me, it upsets me.
She was very calm. She was very unemotional. She never ever showed emotion.
I am policewoman 489 Billingsley, stationed at Grantham. Last week, which was the 14th of May, at the end of the statement, I asked you if you could remember anything about the missing key.
I haven't got it.
The fact that Beverley was young, never been arrested before, arrested for such horrendous things, she didn't appear nervous.
Paul Crampton, who was a baby on the ward. Do you remember that child being on the ward?
Yes, I do.
What I suspect is that you administered something unlawfully to Paul Crampton.
You accept what you want.
Her attitude shocked me.
No matter how much you don't believe me, and I know you don't, I don't care. I can't bloody lie to you. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you for days on end while I get questioned.
She could have gone no comment, but she wanted to talk. She gave the impression that she wanted to help. But if it had been me in that situation, I'd have been terrified.
I know that if it was given insulin, that would make his sugar go down, because it would do that anyway.
How do you know that?
Because diabetics are given insulin to reduce their sugar, like so they can have a meal without going hyperglycemic.
Once the interview notes had been written, obviously they came back to the inquiry teams and we went through them to make sure there was nothing more that we wanted to put in or nothing that hadn't been covered. So it was quite an intensive period.
Beverley Allitt was very affable until you began to ask about the collapses and deaths on Ward 4, at which time she began to say, it wasn't me, it could be the environment, it could be the heating, it could be other nurses.
Am I going to carry insulin around with me?
You tell me. Somebody has done.
I have enough in my pockets as it is.
Somebody has done.
Maybe they have, not me. I think too much of my career and everything to do that.
Allitt denied throughout the interview. She gave excuses. She put other people in the frame. I think she's more relaxed than we were.
That child's been given an overdose of insulin.
Yeah.
At a time when you're looking after him.
Yeah, not only me looking after him. There's a lot of other people on the ward.
You would expect an innocent person to fight, to reject and deny.
I'm sticking to my story. I did not do it. Bloody hell. I can't get it through to nobody, and I tell you what, no matter what you say, I'm sticking to my story. I did not do it. And that is the whole bloody truth, and it'll always be the truth.
If we had any direct evidence, we would have
put that to her in interview. And the fact that we didn't, she thought she was on safe ground.
You haven't got evidence to say I injected him.
No, we've just got the...
Well then, if you haven't got evidence to say I did it, I didn't do it. So there's no evidence to say I did do it, is there?
I thought she would confess. And of course it didn't happen.
Sadly, that interview didn't work out as I had hoped. There wasn't sufficient evidence to charge her.
Stuart then made the decision that we would release her and put her on police bail.
The inquiry was described as complex and sensitive, but nothing conclusive had yet been established. Lincolnshire Police confirmed, however, that a nurse from the hospital had been questioned and released on police bail.
It's too early yet to say whether there is anything at all sinister in this case.
So you're not certain whether there is any evidence to suggest that there was an unlawful killing in the 4 babies case?
Quite clearly, the whole investigation rests upon medical evidence.
Being an old-fashioned detective, we thought that perhaps a young girl that has never previously come to the notice of the police would very quickly tell us what she's done. And that wasn't the case at all. We were totally wrong.
I was still unsure of exactly what had happened. We were no nearer finding out whether she was responsible. And it's fair to say that I wasn't convinced that she'd done it.
We came up with nothing. You always expect you're going to get a winning goal from day one. And now, you know, we're on a draw. We were more determined than ever.
I had a meeting in the afternoon with the police, and the police informed me that at that point they don't have sufficient proof. You do not take your children into hospital and expect the medical profession to harm them. I'm starting to want answers very quickly.
I really, really felt for the families. It was just a matter of working through the evidence. So I then opened up the inquiry to all of the children. From that point onwards, there was a change in attitude.
When Beverley Allitt was released on bail, it was obvious that we needed to widen the inquiry to get more evidence.
We had limited evidence of the individual attacks, but what we did know was that she was there for each and every one of them.
I was becoming more and more convinced that all of the collapses were malicious.
With a serial killer or any series of incidents, you've got to establish that they are connected. Any defence team would tear it apart if there was somebody else who had the opportunity to do the incident. There were 7 teams working on different children. They were looking at anybody in the system who might have had the opportunity to cause that cardiac arrest. And underlining all this, Allitt seemed to be there all the time.
I was so concerned that I rang the hospital and asked to suspend her from duty.
In connection with the case, a nurse working for the hospital has been put on extended leave.
One nurse has been put on police bail after being interviewed by detectives. She's now on extended leave from the hospital, pending the outcome of the inquiry.
It was now very, very important that we did it for the victims and the parents, but also for the hospital, because that hospital was under jeopardy. We didn't ever have Allitt actually in a position where anybody had seen her causing harm to a child. But we did have the circumstantial evidence that she was there all the time, and these incidents only ever happened when she was there.
What my team had to do was to gather evidence so that the experts could see what really was going on. Four children had gone through pathology and no murder had been highlighted. So to actually move from the position where you've got 4 natural deaths to 4 unnatural deaths requires you to do an element of work. We narrowed down 13 children and we set about looking at the circumstances of each collapse.
The medical evidence was obviously key. Trying to find medical information, blood, serums, organs,
X-rays, photographs, body parts, anything that may assist in identifying what had happened to these children.
I was tasked with dealing with the parents of the other children and the subsequent nurses that had looked after them. I think it's fair to say that the nurses' attitude had changed. They were willing to help.
Prior to that, where there'd been this caring nature and not particularly wanting to let down one of their own, we now had a leper in the camp that they were quite happy to give us evidence.
As we interviewed more and more people, it became apparent that a pattern was emerging. Not only was Beverley Allitt present at these attacks, but she was alone at them, and there was evidence that she had persuaded other nurses that might have been present with her to go and do other things. She was dictating the nurses' movements on the ward.
They'd seen her in places that she shouldn't have been.
There was an incident with Liam Taylor when the parents went back into the ward to see him one evening. Beverley Allitt was alone in there with the child. And she said, "Oh, you've just come at the right time." He was violently sick. I had to change my uniform. No other medical staff, nurses, ever remember any incident with Liam Taylor projectile vomiting, and certainly didn't see Bev change her uniform.
Police are going through the records of other young patients who were admitted to Ward 4, some of whom died. A hospital spokesman said today that detectives were investigating the possible misuse of a prescribed drug.
By very diligent searching, they did find other samples from other children. One baby who had died had a very high plasma potassium level. Now, potassium is an essential part of our body, but potassium out of a bottle can be poisonous. In fact, so poisonous that the injection of potassium chloride has been used to kill prisoners on death row in America. And with Claire Pett, blood had been collected from her, and the potassium level was unbelievably high.
Every one of these children that collapsed had a cannula fitted in the back of their hand. So the administering of drugs was easy. We concluded that the deaths of the 4 children were down to cardiotoxic drugs. 4 children who had died on that ward had been murdered.
And Allitt had been there for each and every one of them.
Nobody in a caring profession had before been thought to be capable of harming children in a hospital environment. From that moment on, the world's press descended on us.
Medical experts were brought in by police to check the baby's post-mortem files. Only then did they tell Joe and Chris Taylor that their son Liam had died of unnatural causes.
Assumed that it was one of those things that was going to be unexplainable, because Liam was he was the first kiddie to die.
To suddenly learn that she had, been given a drugs overdose it was like having her die all over again.
And Lincolnshire police said they sympathised with the parents' concern, but the case was complex and had to be dealt with thoroughly.
We felt that obviously we'd got the right person, and it was our duty to find out how and why and when, and the sooner the better. We are now developing quite a lot more evidence. I recovered X-rays from all over the country. I met a radiographer. I had about 4 X-rays with me at the time, and one of them was Kayleigh Desmond. There was air that had been injected into the armpit, which had probably tracked down to the heart.
There's needle tracking under the arm, an injection of either a cardiotoxic drug or air had been administered into this little girl, and that was the cause of the collapse.
There was also one of Katie Phillips. Katie had 3 or 4 attacks and relapses. The radiographer identified fractures in the back of the ribs next to the rib cage.
With a baby, you need very, very little pressure to cause rib fractures. Sadly, Katie will need support for the rest of her life.
Katie Phillips is one of twins. Becky Phillips, the other. When Becky died, identical twins usually get similar symptoms. And I said, can you kindly therefore bring Katie? Katie, sadly, ended up handicapped. Katie, who was admitted because of my insistence.
As we began to collect evidence, we could quite clearly see as investigating officers a clear pattern. She managed to make herself alone with children that subsequently collapsed. Raised the alarm on many occasions. She always volunteered to go with those children that were being transferred to other hospitals. There comes this pattern of somebody that seemed to want to be centre stage. Somebody that wanted to get the adulation of being the one that spotted all these things. The girl who, at 22 years old, was prepared to enter a caring profession and then was prepared to murder children for her own ends.
It's here, at the very centre of the investigation, senior policemen will meet with medical experts, scientists and lawyers. They will have to decide whether this was a series of incredible medical coincidences or murder.
I decided that I would call a conference of all of the experts connected with the case. I presented to all that were there the new evidence.
Clifton explained what the case was all about, Up till that time, nobody else had voiced such an opinion. Other people were still prepared to say that this was a series of unhappy coincidences, bad laboratory practice, errors, which we all know exist.
I think it's fair to say that it was a real eye-opener for the experts that were present, and they agreed that the answer lay within the nursing staff. Beverley Allitt committed the crimes.
Having got the medical opinion back that implicated the other children, we took the decision to bring Beverley Allitt back to the police station.
You've been arrested on suspicion this morning of the murder of Becky Phillips. For the murder of Liam James Taylor.
For the murder of Timothy William Hardwick.
And for the murder of Claire Louise Peck. For the attempt murder of Bradley John Gibson.
Of Paul Crampton.
Of Hayley Joanne Desmond. Of Yip Hung Chan.
For the attempt murder of Katie Sue Phillips.
Of Christopher Peascott.
Of Christopher John King at Grantham.
Of Michael Davidson.
Of the attempt murder of Patrick Robert Elford.
Why did you attempt to murder or murder some of these children?
No reply.
She was more reserved, more careful about what she said. She'd been advised by instructing solicitors not to answer questions and made it plain that she didn't want to answer any questions.
It was very frustrating. She was saying nothing at all. The difficulty with a no reply interview is that you probably think it's a waste of time, but if there's no reply, there is a good chance that they know that they're guilty.
Surely you've got something to say about those children.
No reply.
Or murder. By you. If you're having for the parents of these children.
No reply.
So after Allitt had been interviewed, she was then charged with 20 cases, which included 4 murder. And then she was put in a cell to go to court the following morning.
For parents and relatives, it had been a long, painful wait. Charges were to be pressed against 23-year-old Beverley Allitt.
The man leading the investigation issued this statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, last night, 23-year-old Beverley Gale Allitt of Grantham was charged with 4 counts of murder, 8 counts of attempted murder, and 8 counts of causing grievous bodily harm. I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking the management and staff of the Grantham and Kesteven Hospital for their cooperation during what has been a most difficult and complex inquiry.
I felt that the work that we'd done was justified. Something happened that caused the children to collapse, and that collapse was unexpected and unnatural.
I distinctly remember that on the following day I arrived at work on duty because I knew I was accompanying her to Grantham Magistrates Court. I went down to the cell to get her to come up to the charge desk so that we could handcuff her and get her in the van. She was fast asleep in the cell as if she was on holiday or staying a night in a hotel. Certainly not in a police cell, having been charged with all these offences the previous night.
The former nurse was brought to court under heavy protection after a night in Grantham police cells.
You bastard!
The parents of the children named in the charges had gathered outside, many clearly distressed.
I'm never sure in a standard case what the jury's going to do. But in this particular case, where there is no direct evidence, I was never quite sure what the jury were going to make of it. It's not the easiest of cases to bring before a court.
The evidence was so technical and a lot of medical evidence over a long period of time. And it's very difficult, obviously, for a jury to understand.
It was almost 2 years after the inquiry started that Beverley Allitt went to trial. There was a lot of media interest in the case.
Beverley Allitt from Grantham is charged with the murders of 11-year-old Timothy.
We arrived just outside the magistrates' court. As you would expect, there was a lot of members of the public around, including some of the parents of these children. And I distinctly remember her peering out of the windows of the van like this, as if she was excited to see how many people were there. And yet again, she was the centre of attention. Whereas I remember sitting in the van and there was cameras flashing all over the place and thinking, oh, you're not going to be taking pictures of me. But she wanted it.
The court case was just another step on the journey we'd been taking. Some parents, the parents who sadly lost children, will look at things very differently.
Public prosecution did not consider that they had sufficient evidence, especially in the absence of direct eyewitness, that this case will succeed. That fear whether the jury will ever convict this woman or not.
At the back of your mind, you can never, ever be absolutely certain with circumstantial evidence that you're going to get a conviction. They only need to have one element of doubt, which is right, to throw it out. You want a guilty person to be found guilty, and sometimes the evidence doesn't come up to proof.
During the hearing, a composed Miss Allitt wearing jeans and a casual top spoke only to confirm her name.
Allitt appeared in court like she had done really at Grantham Police Station. She was quiet, emotionless. This was the first case in British history that a nurse was charged with offences against children in a hospital. Of murdering children, attempting to murder children and inflicting grievous bodily harm on the children. Angel of Death, she was referred to as.
The trial lasted 11 weeks. And throughout the trial, we were still looking for anything that might give us an advantage.
The defense tried their best. Every case they tried to say it had nothing to do with Beverley Allitt. They were trying to convince that we were the guys who were responsible for the disasters.
There was an awful lot of evidence. It can be frustrating, you have to go through that. And at the end of the day, it's the court to make the decision.
The jury came back to court today after 6 nights in a hotel to return their final verdicts.
The court was absolutely full on the day of the verdict. There was silence in court.
When the verdicts are issued, hopefully they're what you want or what you expect. And the verdicts eventually were guilty. 4 verdicts of murder. There were 6 verdicts of GBH, and there were 3 verdicts of attempted murder.
And the judge subsequently sentenced her to 13 life sentences.
Guilty of murdering 4 children. Guilty of 3 attempted murders. Guilty 6 times of causing grievous bodily harm with intent. A nurse is almost the last person you'd expect to turn out to be a serial killer. Beverley Allitt begins a sentence without end tonight.
There was so much emotion, there was people bursting into tears. It's fair to say that even the police officers there were overwhelmed with emotion.
It was traumatic, shall I say. And I don't think there was anybody in that court that didn't feel it.
As a judge said to take her down, there were emotional scenes in the public gallery with families bursting into tears. One woman jumped up shouting, "Bastard, bastard." Another shouted, "Lock her in a cage."
We've just got hate, I'm sorry. It's just got hate and there's nothing more to say about it, really.
The families were very relieved and they could then get on with the rest of their lives.
13 life sentences is what we hoped for, and that's exactly what we've got. I only hope that it's going to be at Her Majesty's pleasure and she's never released.
We'll never forget what happened.
If she ever got out, we would be waiting for her. Even if we was old with sticks, we'd be waiting for her.
It'll never go away, but at least Beverley won't come out now.
It was very emotional at the end of the day that the inquiry was over and successful.
With all eyes anxious for a glimpse of Britain's worst female serial killer, Beverley Allitt was driven from court to begin her 13 life sentences at Holloway Prison in London.
Well, I saw Beverley Allitt as a rather pathetic figure, really, and when we listened to her medical evidence, we probably could conclude that these tragedies were inevitable.
The reaction I probably remember the most was after the verdicts had been delivered. There was then a summary given to the court before conviction about her medical history.
She was constantly at the surgery for some sort of illness. Most of them were fake. She was admitted to hospital where she'd injected her breast with fluid. She catheterised herself. It was suggested she had this Munchausen and Munchausen by proxy.
Munchausen syndrome by proxy is where the carer causes the harm so that they get the adoration as a carer. It is an explanation for crime, but it's not a defence for crime.
Maybe in the first incident, who knows, that she did this to try and get attention, but it went wrong. And then she just progressed and it got to the stage where she didn't care. She knew what she was doing, and yet she persisted in doing it. Well, that's unforgivable in my book.
Grantham woke up this morning as a small town making headlines. The papers were full of stories of Nurse Beverley Allitt and her murderous 2 months at Grantham General Hospital.
Allitt's crimes are horrendous on many levels. This is very much like dropping a stone in the middle of a pond. There are clearly the immediate victims, the children, their parents. But also, Allitt's victims were the hospital staff.
The hospital suffered tremendously. People didn't go to Grantham Hospital because they didn't think it was safe. The stigma of what happened continued, and in the end, they closed Ward 4.
It certainly destroyed me and my family. My reputation is at stake. My future is uncertain. Whatever the post I had applied, Dr. Nana Kara is with Beverley Allitt and do not accept him. He is not a good consultant. I keep my head up. I sleep comfortably. I feel in my own way. Those parents, some of the children who died in my care, on my arms, continued to support me openly. To me, Beverley Allitt is cold-blooded murderer.
Once Beverley Allitt had been convicted of this offence, and the country had accepted that we had this serial killer who was actually a nurse killing children,
I don't think there was anybody who would ever think it would ever occur again.
This is as near as it came to seeing Lucy Letby on the day she was told she'll spend the rest of her life in prison.
Lucy Letby, this is another nurse in exactly the same position as Allitt. It's amazing to me that you can get people in these positions of trust and care to commit these crimes. And now it's happened twice. I would never have expected it to happen once. And I'm just hoping it's never going to happen in the future.
Lucy Letby seemed like an ordinary woman, but that's exactly what she used to cover the truth and murdered babies as they desperately clung to life.
What's the good thing about it?
We're out, got more freedom in it.
Do you like it better than where you were before?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I've got more freedom. I'm not locked up all the time.
Following her 13 life sentences, Beverley Allitt was taken to Rampton Secure Hospital. I went to see her with her solicitor. She had lost numerous stones in weight and was a sliver of her former self. When I questioned her about why she'd done it, she got up and walked away from me. She wouldn't answer the questions.
She was very evil. She was medically trained. She used that training to damage these children, and they had no defence.
Parents trust their children to the hospital staff and particular nurses, and Bev made points in the early days of befriending some of these parents to just throw that to one side and kill the children. I mean, who would do that?
I never really wasted a lot of time having any strong emotions about Allitt. Paul's well and is now married and has a daughter. Some of the parents obviously suffered greatly in terms of the loss of a child, and I'm sure their views of Allitt will be coloured by that, quite rightly so.
You go into hospital, you go to your doctor, you go to healthcare providers with the expectation that they will help you, not with the expectation that they will harm you. And the fact that it was brought to light that this could happen, this was the first time that somebody in a hospital was damaging children deliberately. And that's why I think it was such a heinous crime.